Shalom, welcome to Eretz Israel. I'm Avraham Shira. We're in our series on Hanukkah, part 6. The sixth candle is going to be lit very soon. And we're talking about loyalty tonight because what happened was that the Greek people were a friendly people when it was to their advantage. And the great Alexander came to Israel and he introduced the Greek culture to the land and brought a lot of prosperity and a lot of trade and a lot of cultural mixing and a lot of information, and a lot of things that people wanted. But what happens when Alexander dies? Suddenly, there are 3 bosses in Eretz Israel. Sound familiar? Think about it. It was the Ottomans, then there was the British, and then it was the Jews fighting with the British, and then splitting into factions. And so we had here, during the Hanukkah stories, we had the Egyptian branch of Alexander's empire wanted a piece of Eretz Israel. And the Syrian branch also got a piece of Eretz Israel. And so between those 2 branches and the original Greek version, we had quite a salad of bosses running around this country. And so, and of course, what happens is to people that are in power is when they feel that they're going to lose power, and this is true in every regime you will ever see in history over all time, that once the power that is in force starts to feel weaker, he tightens his belt, he tightens the strings, he tightens the clamps on people's lives, he tightens the economic avenues of freedom. He tightens even the physical avenues of freedom, like telling you when you can travel and when you can't travel and where you can travel. And then also it tightens the control of money, which controls, of course, the idea of borrowing and lending and interest rate. Those things get controlled, tightened down too. And this is a pattern that we see expanding and contracting throughout history, economic history. So that the wisdom that the Torah is teaching us, my friends, is that you have to know where you are in the cycle of expansion, of benevolence in the relationship with the nations, or the contraction of the benevolence and the remission of the kindness that turns to quite the opposite. So there's an ebb and flow between kindness and cruelty, between benevolence and tyranny throughout Jewish history. And we see it here in this Greek version because Alexander was the greatest and most powerful of his day. So he could afford to be benevolent and open with the people and not try to control them. But once he was out of this picture, then these other little smaller kingdoms, one based in Alexandria, one based in Assyria, and one based here in Israel, they started to lose the power. So what did they start doing? They started clamping down. And what they look for is a place that they can control the local population. And they see that the loyalty of the population is always to the Torah in the end of the day. Now there are, of course, those Jews who will choose the foreign power over the loyalty to the Torah because they're not that particularly interested in the mitzvot and the practice of the Torah and the upkeep of the mikdash and all the other things that are required. And so there is a polarization in the middle of the nation between the religious and the non-religious. And there is a separation between the influences of the nations here. And that creates conflict. And that's exactly what happened. And to the Greeks felt themselves not only challenged by the Jews and the more Orthodox Jews, but they also felt challenged by the other aspects of Alexander's empire that was breaking into pieces because he was just a good memory in people's minds at the time. Now, and the strength that was once witnessed here became tyranny. Now, what's the difference between a strong ruler and a tyrant? Well, a strong ruler doesn't use violence to bend the will of the people. And a tyrant brings violence because he has no loyalty. So it is a question of loyalty. And in the end of the days, what happens always, we see over and over in all the different places the Jews have been in exile, is our benevolent host is being attacked also. And then the Jewish people become ancillary, secondary to the welfare of the host nation. And the Greeks saw that they better sew up the torn seams in their own empire before they make friends with the Jews that ran Jerusalem and the temple. And their loyalty to this idea of the Jewish God, well, it disappeared very quickly. Now remember, Alexander was behind, and in his period, they translated the Torah into Greek. Now, Greek is considered a very high level of wisdom language, a language that has a lot of wisdom. The rabbis praise Greek language in the Talmud. However, when they translated it, they considered it a sign that Jewish power had weakened and that the Greek power was reaching its zenith, and that the Jewish people would be under the crush of the foreign culture. In other words, when your language is on top, then you have power. When your language is down, you lose power. The same thing with your currency. The same thing with, you see, in trade and business in general. So you see the part of what's going on today, this war over the dollar. Which currency will be the next world dominating currency? Still, it's the dollar. But you notice that they're taking shots at the dollar anytime they can. And the other empires that are existent today are looking to consolidate their power over the dollar. And so at this time, basically, the Greeks had to deal with either choosing the Jews and their God, which they weren't going to do because they already had their system, or choosing the other local non-Jewish powers. And that's what they did. And so that's when things went from bad to worse. And suddenly the Jewish people became a problem. Ever heard of that before? The Jewish question, right? The Jewish problem. What was the Jewish problem before the Holocaust? Well, if you were a Jew, we knew what the problem was. It was people that hated us and were envious of us and did not like the fact that we were so influential, especially considering the small numbers of people we represented in the local population. And so what we see is that anti-Semitism is a tool, and it changes over time. And it becomes anti-Torah, or it could be anti-Jewish. And it's a big difference. And today we have a new version, anti-Israel, or i.e. sovereignty, political. So that you could be okay with your Jewish neighbor, but the Jews are bad as a nation because they've left the Palestinians there, the places that they always lived in and that were not taken from them. The problem with the Palestinians, their problem was that they didn't have a good leader, and they ran away from Eretz Israel during the 48 war. If they'd stayed here, they'd still have their houses and their land. But they ran because of fear, because God put the fear in them. But that's a different story. The point, though, is when we see what happened long ago, we see it's still happening today. And what's happening is that the Jews are in a swing or a shift between being more religious and Torah-based or more secular and worldly-based. And that changes your friends. And so Alexander left the country in a state of vulnerability to where all the smaller powers could eventually gang up on the Jews and decide, okay, we got to get rid of the religious. They're the problem. Because they have a different philosophy and they have a different theology. They're the problem. That wasn't the problem. The problem was their own administration of their domination and how they ran the country here. Now, what that produces, you'll see over and over as well, is a need to challenge and to control the thoughts of the people. See, because if you could control what people think, you could control their behavior. And if you control their behavior, then you will have power consolidated. And so there's this element where politics becomes a force for unifying the people behind a particular philosophy. So politicians will pick a philosophy, and that will attract a certain sector of the population. But when that doesn't serve them, they'll change the philosophy. We've seen that over and over in Israel. The joke is there's no left and there's no right. It's just whoever your friends are when you need those friends. And so the shift is back and forth all the time. And then if you look into the history of the battle between right and left in Israel today, you'll see that the main issues, both parties have always voted the same. There are only a few certain issues that the left or the right were in conflict with the others. So the right and left only becomes a figment of a struggle. In other words, like a wrestling match that you pay money to watch. And so politics becomes captivating because of the conflict itself. And not because there's any real substantive change in the philosophy or the theology of the people. And the leaders know this. They're not dummies. They're smart. They know that if they want to stay in power, they have to play this basketball game back and forth, up and down the court between right and left and right. But what that creates is a very weak-minded leadership, a very weak position about who we are and why we're here, why we suffer, why we have this land, what our goal and our mission and our purpose is. And when you don't have those things in mind, the population becomes very vulnerable to being, well, I hate to use the word brainwashed, but I guess I did, right? It's kind of an old-fashioned word. It doesn't really tell us what's going on. What it really is, software flipping. People flip their belief system according to whoever's in power. And it's not based on the truth of the Torah. And if we have the truth, then we don't have to worry about the politics because we have a truth. We have a position. And the most interesting thing is, if you take the Torah, you will see that part of the Torah is very liberal and part of the Torah is very conservative. But of course, everybody's got the religious people as pigeonholed as being extremely, extremely right-wing, and that's bad nowadays. But that's completely a package spin of who the Torah people really are, because the Torah really wants to and strives to bring us to the center of all controversy, to the center between the extremes of liberalism and conservatism, because any extreme is not good. Too much liberal or too much conservative is not good. The middle is where the truth is. And that's true in the tree of life. Truth is Tiferet. It's the middle column that goes from the head to the heart and into the body. And so what we really want is the middle. But you notice, you never see a party that calls itself We're the Middle. Because then what happens is everybody else is against you because you're not playing ball by the rules. But the true position is the middle, is the Torah. But they don't want, because they need to keep the Torah people looking radical, conservative, and fanatic. And they need that stereotype. And that's what the stereotype was in the time of the Greeks as well. You understand? So the stereotyping of a people is a convenience and political manipulation of what people think about themselves and about their neighbors and about their leaders and about their army. But it doesn't really hold water, because the loyalty is really always to Hashem. The loyalty test is always to Hashem for us and for the Greeks and for the Syrians and for the Ptolemies from Alexandria. It's still the same test because they all know that there's a Jewish God and they know that God did what he did. They all know the story. They praised the Jews after they translated the Torah into Greek. They loved it. It was a bestseller. Sound familiar? What happened when King James translated the Torah into Middle English? Oh, it became the world's best book. So you see, the nations, they also know the truth. They see the Torah, but the loyalty is being tested sorely. Loyalty to the principles of the Torah. Loyalty to the Ten Commandments. I'm not saying it's easy, but at least we can define the problem. So yesterday we talked about the lie about the fact that the lie about holy or unholy war. Because the Muslims know exactly that there is a holy war going on here. They call it jihad, a holy war. But the West doesn't want to call it anything like that. The West wants to dampen all that language Because when you dampen the language, you soften the parameters of definitions, and that weakens the philosophy. And that weakens, why do I care? Well, how am I strong philosophy? What, am I still in college worrying about philosophy? No, the philosophy is what makes us act and makes us, determines how far we're willing to go for Hashem. How far we are willing to sacrifice. And the Torah is very clear. We have very clear laws about when we give our lives for the Torah and when we don't. And when we surrender and when we don't surrender. It's all written in the books of the law. And even the people who know the books of the law won't necessarily always keep it because it's not to their advantage. We're not going to point any fingers. It's not healthy behavior. So this is where we are today, my friends. We are in a stadium of voices. Everybody screaming their position. Because they want to be heard. Because they want the power. They want the chair. They want the paycheck. They want the Volvo. They want the fame. The influence. Are you an influencer? You see how the word influence comes around? Well, what do I need to be? Do I set out to be an influencer? No, I set out, except I do, as an Orthodox Jew who learns Torah and wants to share this beautiful tradition that we have. Yes, that's called influencing, but not for the sake of Avraham Shira. It's for the sake of the Torah itself. And that is because we believe it's divine, and it's true, and it will save us. And it will save all the people of this planet who attach to God. Mi Lashem alai. Whoever is for God, go to him, go to his camp. Don't listen to anybody else, but what it says in the Holy Book. And if you don't have a good interpretation, call me, write me. Right now, Eretz Israel has had our first rain in ages. And God said, I'm going to give you a land of hills. Because the water is not going to gather and puddle and pool in a lot of places. And it's the Middle East, so we don't get rain except 3 months a year. And so what happens is we, as an agrarian culture, need to rely on God more. He designed the very land that we live in to make us need him more. Because, if you live in a land where there's water all the time, you forget about God. You forget that you need rain and you need to pray for rain. And that's not what Hashem wanted. Hashem wanted us to rely on him, so he made the land a little tough, a little rocky, and a little bit with hills. So, where's a flat field to plant my tomatoes? You got to put terrazzo everywhere, and so on and so forth. But the rain has come to Eretz Israel, and the rain is a blessing. And it's a blessing that we make a blessing on every day. And the rain itself is, of course, not just physical nourishment. It's the nourishment of the relationship between heaven and earth. And when we keep the Torah and we come close in this test of loyalty, then the rain starts to fall. And everything starts to flower. And this place will be a garden again. It already is on the way. And we look forward to having you here with us as we build this beautiful garden. So Shabbat Shalom, Hanukkah Sameach, Chodesh Tov. It's a new month, a new beginning. A new Chodesh Tov is Rosh Chodesh, a new head. We need a new head to re-accept the Torah. God bless you all. We'll see you maybe tomorrow night after Shabbat, and we'll continue this series because, we have 2 more days of Hanukkah, so 2 more days to talk about this amazing revolution. And we're going to get into the real nitty-gritty. Well, how does it actually work? What kind of cultural revolution are we looking for? What are we looking for? A Jew-tube instead of YouTube? Let's go for YouTube. God bless you all. Hag Sameach.